And now let's get into one of my main focus of me wanting to do this live stream was to get into the characters. And this, if you're going to get into the SNK library, the first character you have to get acquainted with is none other than Terry Bogard. So let's take a look at the career and life and the story of Terry Bogard, who I feel is arguably has the best and most interesting story, and therefore is arguably the best and most interesting character in all of the fighting games, period. And I think as I go through this series and introduce certain characters, I had to start with Terry Bogard because he is the origin of it all. And his father was actually murdered by Geese Howard there's Geese Howard. He was murdered when Andy and Terry Bogard were just children. And then they vowed to return to get revenge on him. And this is the story of the first Fatal Fury game. Andy and Terry Bogard return 10 years later to get revenge on Geese Howard by entering the King of Fighters tournament. So the very first King of Fighters starts from Fatal Fury. And here's Geese Howard is actually in charge of the tournament now, and his right-hand man, Billy Kane. And here's Lily, the girl from earlier in the show. She's all grown up now, and Terry Bogard actually falls in love with her. And this is also where Terry and Andy meet Joe Higashi. And Tung Fu Rue, he has these ancient techniques, and that's what Geese Howard was after, and that's why Geese Howard killed his father. And so Tung Fu Rue actually teaches these ancient techniques to Terry Bogard so he can go.
Have you forgotten? You owe me your life for rescuing you from the slums.
But yes, before he can get his revenge, Geese Howard kills the love of his life in Lily. So now Geese Howard has killed his father and his love of his life, and Terry Bogard does get his revenge and supposedly kills Geese Howard. Until the very next year, we return with Fatal Fury 2. Of course, the story has to continue. And Fatal Fury 2 picks up right where the first one leaves off. And Geese Howard's stepbrother, Wolfgang Krauser, is the new big baddie of this adventure. And Wolfgang Krauser, you actually see why Geese Howard acted the way he did. Wolfgang Krauser beat him up, and his family is super evil and terrible. And he's actually more powerful than Geese Howard, and he actually beats up on Terry Bogard pretty bad, but Terry is able to defeat the almighty Wolfgang Krauser in the end. Of course, the good guys have to prevail over the bad guys. But of course, we find out that Geese Howard is not dead, and he does return in Fatal Fury 3. And he again sets up the King of Fighters tournament. So this is technically be the third King of Fighters tournament. And of course, Terry, Andy, Joe Higashi, and the rest of their friends, because by this point there's a lot more characters already into the series, which we'll get into those as I progress with this live stream, going through the characters of the King of Fighters franchise. But as I said, it's important to start with Terry Bogard because it all kind of revolves around Terry. I mean, he's the person that started it. His relationship with Geese Howard is the core central thing of this franchise. But then Geese Howard is eventually defeated by Terry Bogard, and someone new steps in and creates the new King of Fighters tournament, and now they change the rules that instead of just being a one-on-one competition, it is teams of 3 compete in this new King of Fighters tournament. This tournament will be held with representatives from Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and all sorts of different franchises from all over SNK's library. So characters from games like Akari Warriors and stuff that really are not in fighting games are brought into this new franchise. And it actually produced like a cinematic universe of sorts that Neo Geo made here in the early 90s, mind you, that all was brought together within these King of Fighters games. And we'll get into all the particular characters. Again, as I said, as we go along here, I will give you the backstories on them all. But as I said, today we're focusing just on Terry Bogard and the Orochi Saga, which is King of Fighters 94, 95, 96, and 97. And then King of Fighters 98 is a dream bout, which we'll get into that a little bit. But the Orochi Saga, you know, as I was saying earlier, these ancient techniques, that's all plays a role into what goes into what goes on into the King of Fighters franchise. It very much has to do with all these scrolls and these ancient techniques. And that's why these characters in these games have these like powers, because they're able to harness like their chi and life force from the earth to produce all these amazing powers. And the Orochi Saga has different, you know, bad guy villains. You know, there's always a big villain at the end of it, surprise, overpowered type creature. You know, so the game's definitely, the story gets convoluted as it went along. But, you know, all the characters, like I said, from the Fatal Fury franchise and then Art of Fighting and everything are brought into this one. Unfortunately, Samurai Showdown is not represented in King of Fighters, and the reason why, it all has to do with the story. This story is all that I'm telling you is all is built off of each other, and so you have to get to know each character, and as the story keeps progressing. And as I said here, this is King of Fighters 98. I included this one because this is a dream bout, and this is the first time that they did like a dream match. Like, it's not part of the official canon because of King of Fighters or Fatal Fury. It's just like an imaginary game, but it's just an amazing game, and it's kind of like the conclusion of the Orochi Saga. So I had to include it here for representation. And also, the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters sagas do kind of branch off. They're not exactly 100% accurate. But having said that, Terry Bogard does find himself a new love interest in Blue Mary. And again, we will get into more in Blue Mary as we go along, divulging into these characters. And as I said, the franchises do divulge. There's the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters timelines, but in the official Fatal Fury timeline, there is a quote-unquote end, and that is in Goru Mark of the Wolves, where Terry Bogard, because he does kill Geese Howard, then he goes and raises Geese Howard's son, Rock Howard, and he grows up, and he joins, and they have the new King of Fighters tournament, and it goes back to single elimination, 1 versus 1, and you can see Terry Bogard returns, but he's older now, and he's got on a little bit different outfit, he's a little bit more mature. And yeah, this is kind of like the conclusion of the Terry Bogard story. And he does not end up winning in Goro Mark of the Wolves. He is not the one that actually is the final victor, because he is a little bit of an old man. But nevertheless, he is there. And then here, that is essentially the story in a nutshell of Terry Bogard. And again, I'll be getting into more and more of these characters over the course of my live streams. So yeah, there's Terry Bogard. So yeah, there's a little bit of a history lesson, you know, on all the history on Terry Bogard, and you know, as I keep saying, I'm gonna keep going over these characters, and I had to start with Terry because he's the main man of this whole SNK multiverse that they created. It all revolves around him. But I'll definitely be getting into, you know, maybe Joe Higashi next, or Mai, and Geese Howard definitely as well. Because even though he's not, Geese Howard isn't in the base level version of King of Fighters 15. They're bringing in more characters as unlockables, and Billy Kane, I believe, as well. Which those are Billy Kane and Geese Howard are old school SNKA fighting guys that people that know these franchises, they're always wanting those guys. So it's cool that they're going to be bringing them back.
Hey, thanks for watching. And don't forget, we got the iiRcadians merch store. If you want to take a little piece of the show with you, you can get it right here. We got everything. You want some Mikey J stuff? We got the Mikey J Productions for you. We got it all in the iiRcadians shop. So take a chance and stop by. We'll take care of you.